coffee mug slipped from Rose's
help!
trembling fingers
Don't move,
as
or I'll
two
cut
men
you.
closed in at Maple Diner.
You're coming with us now.
The first attacker, thick neck, prison tattoos snaking up his forearms, seized her wrist with crushing force. "Think you can run from us, Rose?" His breath reeked of stale cigarettes and menace. His partner produced a switchblade, the steel singing as it locked into place. "Boss doesn't like it when people disappear." At booth 7, Ben Torres sat motionless, calloused hands steady beside untouched pancakes. His 7-year-old son Caleb babbled about home runs and strikeouts, blissfully unaware of the nightmare unfolding mere feet away. Ben's storm-grey eyes catalogued every detail: the blade's angle, the woman's rapid pulse visible at her throat, the tremor in her voice as she whispered, "Please." 15 years of classified kills had taught him to strike like lightning, swift, silent, lethal. The peaceful plumber facade he'd carefully constructed was about to crumble. Some masks, once torn away, can never be worn again. Ben moved like death itself. No warning, no hesitation. His chair scraped once against linoleum before he became a shadow in motion. The first thug never saw him coming, a perfectly executed chokehold from behind, cutting off oxygen and consciousness in 3 seconds flat. The second man spun toward the movement, knife raised, mouth opening to shout. Ben's knee connected with his solar plexus, driving every molecule of air from his lungs. The blade clattered to the floor as the attacker crumpled, gasping like a landed fish. Silence engulfed Maple Diner like a heavy blanket. 15 seconds had passed. 2 unconscious bodies lay sprawled across the black and white checkered floor, their breathing shallow but steady. Ben stood between them and Rose, his chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm, not a single bead of sweat visible on his weathered forehead. The other patrons, an elderly couple sharing pie, a trucker nursing black coffee, a waitress frozen mid-pour, stared with slack jaws and wide eyes. This wasn't the quiet plumber who fixed their leaky faucets and never said more than necessary. "Navy," Ben said softly, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories. He looked directly at Rose, whose green eyes reflected a mixture of terror and recognition. 15 years. Caleb finally looked up from his pancakes, syrup dripping from his fork, brown hair falling across confused eyes that mirrored his father's. "Dad?" The single word hung in the air like a question mark made of pure bewilderment. What just happened? The diner's bell chimed as Officer Martinez pushed through the glass door, hand instinctively moving toward his holster before taking in the scene. 2 men unconscious, a woman pressed against the wall with tears streaming down her cheeks, and Ben Torres, the same man who'd installed new pipes at the police station last month, standing over them like an avenging angel. Martinez had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining Cedar Falls PD. He recognized the stance, the controlled breathing, the absolute stillness that followed violence. This was a warrior, not a tradesman. "Those moves," Martinez said, crouching beside the unconscious attackers to check their pulses. "Where did you learn to do that?" His radio crackled with the dispatch chatter, but he ignored it, focused entirely on Ben's answer. The silence stretched like taffy, sweet and sticky and uncomfortable. Finally, Ben's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. "Navy SEALs, long time ago." His voice carried the weight of secrets buried so deep they'd fossilized. Ancient history now. Rose pushed herself away from the wall, her legs unsteady as newborn colts. She studied Ben's face as if seeing him for the first time, the silver threading through his dark hair,
Please,
the
someone
faint
help!
scars along
Don't
his
move or I'll
knuckles,
cut
the way
you.
he held himself like a
You're coming
coiled
with us
spring,
now.
even in apparent relaxation. "You're Caleb's father," she whispered, more statement than question. "The plumber." Her laugh came out broken, tinged with hysteria. At parent-teacher conferences you seemed so normal," Ben supplied, kneeling to Caleb's eye level. His son's face had gone pale, pancakes forgotten. "Dad, are you a superhero?" The innocent question hit harder than any enemy's bullet. Ben reached out to smooth his son's unruly cowlick, the same gesture he'd performed 1,000 mornings before. Nobody, just a dad who used to have a different job. But Caleb's eyes held new knowledge now, the kind that changes everything between a father and son. The kind that asks uncomfortable questions at bedtime. Martinez finished zip-tying the attacker's wrists and stood, brushing dust from his knees. "They'll be out for another 10 minutes, maybe 15. What did they want with you, miss?" He looked expectantly at Rose, notepad already in hand. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish, gasping for air. "Mitchell," she finally managed. "Rose Mitchell. They had me confused with someone else." The lie came smoothly, practiced, but Ben caught the micro-expression that flickered across her features. Fear mixed with something else. Guilt, maybe, or desperate hope that the lie would hold. The ambulance arrived as the attackers began to stir, followed closely by Detective Wallace, a bear of a man with kind eyes and the persistence of a bloodhound. He'd been investigating a string of missing persons cases across 3 counties, all involving young women who'd vanished without a trace. 2 rough-looking men threatening a pretty schoolteacher in a family diner fit the pattern perfectly. "Miss Mitchell," Wallace said gently, settling his bulk into the booth across from where Rose sat shaking. "These men ever contact you before today?" Rose's hands trembled as she reached for the coffee cup Martinez had brought her. "Never seen them in my life." Another lie, smoother than the first. But her green eyes darted toward the window, scanning the parking lot with the hypervigilance of prey animals. Ben noticed the tell immediately, the same way insurgents had looked for escape routes in Fallujah markets. This woman was running from something, and it was bigger than 2 thugs in a small-town diner. "They knew your name," Ben said quietly, settling beside Caleb and wrapping an arm around his son's thin shoulders. "Called you Rose specifically. Said someone doesn't like people who disappear." His grey eyes held hers steadily, without judgment but with unmistakable intensity. "You sure you don't know what they meant?" The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Finally, Rose looked away, focusing on the swirl of cream in her coffee as if it held answers to questions she wasn't ready to ask. Detective Wallace closed his notepad with a snap that made everyone jump. "Well, regardless of their motives, assault with a deadly weapon is assault with a deadly weapon. They'll be looking at serious time." He stood, fishing a business card from his shirt pocket and sliding it across the table to Rose. "If you remember anything at all, you call me directly, day or night." His eyes lingered on her face with the practiced assessment of a man who'd seen too many victims stay silent out of fear. After the police left with their prisoners, after the other patrons had paid their checks with nervous glances and hurried out, after the waitress had mopped up the spilled coffee and reset the overturned chairs, Ben found himself alone with Rose and Caleb in the suddenly cavernous diner. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows at a different angle now, casting long shadows that hadn't been there before. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The careful normalcy he'd built over 3 months had cracked like thin ice over deep water. "Dad," Caleb said finally, his voice small in the echoing space. "Are the bad men going to come back?" His 7-year-old logic had processed the events with frightening clarity. Bad men had hurt the nice teacher. Daddy had stopped them. But stopping them meant Daddy wasn't who Caleb thought he was. Ben felt the weight of his son's trust settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. "Nobody. They're going to jail for a very long time." But even as he said it, Ben's instincts screamed that this was far from over. Rose pushed her untouched coffee away and stood on unsteady legs. "I should go. I've caused enough trouble for one day." She moved toward the door with jerky, mechanical steps, like a marionette with tangled strings. Ben caught her arm gently, feeling the tension coiled in her muscles. Rose. Her name felt strange on his tongue, intimate somehow despite their brief acquaintance through Caleb's school. If you need help, real help, you know where to find me. She looked up at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for a kindergarten teacher in small-town Iowa. Thank you, she whispered, then glanced down at Caleb. Both of you, but some problems can't be solved with... She gestured vaguely at the space where violence had erupted. With what you can do. The unspoken words hung between them. Some problems follow you, no matter how far you run, no matter how well you hide, no matter how many new identities you assume. Some problems have long memories and longer reaches. That evening, Ben sat on his front porch swing while Caleb practiced batting in the yard, the thwack of ball against bat providing a comforting rhythm in the fading light. But peace felt fragile now, gossamer thin and ready to tear at the slightest provocation. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Ben Torres? The voice was silk over steel, cultured and cold. You made quite an impression today. Ben's blood turned to ice water in his veins. This wasn't about random thugs looking for trouble. This was about Rose, and whatever she was running from had found them all. Who is this? Ben kept his voice level, but his free hand moved instinctively to the small of his back, where he used to carry his sidearm. Old habits died hard, even in the suburbs of Iowa. Someone who appreciates talent when he sees it. 15 seconds to disable 2 trained men. Very impressive. The caller's accent carried hints of Eastern Europe, refined by years of American education. We have a mutual friend,
help me!
Rose Mitchell.
Please, someone help!
Perhaps you'd like to discuss her future. The line went dead.
You're coming with us now.
Ben stared at the phone, his mind racing through tactical scenarios and threat assessments he hadn't considered in 3 years. Caleb's laughter drifted across the yard as he chased fireflies in the gathering dusk, innocent and trusting, and completely unaware that their quiet life had just been shattered by forces neither of them could see coming. The man who'd called knew about the diner, knew about Ben's skills, knew that Rose was more than a simple schoolteacher hiding from an abusive ex-boyfriend. Ben stood slowly, his joints protesting from old injuries earned in places whose names were still classified. He walked inside, locked the door, and pulled out a burner phone he'd hoped never to use again. The number he dialed connected on the first ring. Morrison! The voice was clipped, professional, tinged with the eternal vigilance of those who guard the guardians. It's Torres. I need a favor. A pause, then. Jesus, Ben, I thought you were done with all this. Another pause. What do you need? Information on a Rose Mitchell, kindergarten teacher, Cedar Falls Elementary. Someone wants her badly enough to send professionals. Ben moved to the window, checking sight lines and escape routes with muscle memory that never truly faded. And Morrison? They know about me, too. The silence on the other end stretched long enough for Ben to count his heartbeats. 62, 63, 64. Finally, Morrison's voice came back, heavy with implications. Jesus Christ, Ben. What have you stumbled into? 3 hours later, Ben tucked Caleb into bed with extra stories and longer hugs, his son finally seeming to process the day's events through the lens of childhood resilience. Dad, if bad men come again, will you protect us? Caleb's eyes were drowsy but serious, reflecting the overhead light like twin stars. Always, buddy, always. Ben meant it with every fiber of his being, even as he mentally catalogued weapons, escape routes, and contingency plans. Some promises were written in blood and kept no matter the cost. After Caleb fell asleep, Ben sat in his kitchen with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, waiting for Morrison's callback. The house settled around him with familiar creaks and sighs, but every sound now carried potential threat. The refrigerator's hum could mask footsteps. The settling foundation could hide the scrape of a window being opened. The peaceful suburban sounds he'd grown to love had become a symphony of possible dangers. His phone rang at 11:30. "You sitting down?" Morrison asked without preamble. Ben's grip tightened on the handset. "Rose Mitchell doesn't exist. The woman you know is Rachel Morgan, former financial analyst for Caruso Industries. 2 years ago, she discovered her company was laundering money for one of the biggest drug operations on the East Coast. She copied everything and handed it to the FBI. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Witness protection. It wasn't a question. Was witness protection. Vincent Caruso, the man she testified against, just won his appeal on a technicality.
Please, someone
3
help!
of his key lieutenants were released yesterday. Our intelligence suggests he's personally overseeing the cleanup of loose ends. Morrison's voice carried the weight of too many similar stories with unhappy endings. "Ben, this guy doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. If he's found her, then she's dead unless someone stops him." Ben stood, already moving toward the closet, where his old gear waited in a locked case he'd hoped never to open again. "What about the local FBI? Marshal's service?" But he already knew the answer from Morrison's silence. Bureaucracy moved slowly. Caruso wouldn't wait for proper channels and jurisdictional protocols. He'd strike fast and hard, eliminating the threat before anyone could react. "There's more," Morrison said quietly. "Caruso's people have been tracking her for months. The attack at the diner wasn't random. It was a test. They wanted to see who would help her, what kind of resources she might have." Ben's blood ran cold. "They know about me." The confirmation hung between them like a death sentence. "They know about Caleb, too. School records, soccer practice schedules, your daily routines. Ben, you're not just involved anymore, you're targets." Ben closed his eyes, seeing his son's trusting face, hearing his innocent question about superheroes and bad men. The life he'd built, the peace he'd found, the simple joy of being just a father and a plumber. All of it was crumbling like sand castles before an incoming tide. What are my options? The question came out calmer than he felt. Years of training asserting themselves over parental panic. Officially? Take Caleb and disappear. New identities, new lives, permanent relocation. Caruso will eventually lose interest if you're not a threat. Morrison paused, then continued in a different tone. Unofficially? You could end this permanently, but that road leads to places you swore you'd never go back to. The unspoken invitation hung in the air. One phone call, and Ben could have a full tactical team, unlimited resources, and official sanction to eliminate the threat. All it would cost was his soul and any hope of remaining the father Caleb deserved. Ben stared out his kitchen window at the peaceful suburban street he'd called home for 3 months. Porch lights glowed warmly in windows where normal families lived normal lives, where fathers worried about homework and soccer practice instead of kill teams and extraction protocols. "I need to think." He ended the call and sat in the darkness, weighing impossible choices against unacceptable losses. At dawn, he made his decision. Ben drove to Rose's apartment complex, a modest 2-story building that housed mostly teachers and retired folks. Her car wasn't in its usual spot. The apartment manager, a kindly woman named Mrs. Henderson, shook her head when Ben asked. "Haven't seen her since yesterday morning. Strange thing, though. 2 men came by last night asking about her. Said they were FBI, but they didn't look like federal agents to me. Too rough around the edges." Ben's stomach dropped. "What did you tell them?" Mrs. Henderson adjusted her glasses, studying his face with the sharp eyes of someone who'd raised 6 children and buried 2 husbands. "Same thing I'm telling you. I don't discuss my tenants with strangers. But they seemed to know where her apartment was anyway. Went right to number 12 without asking directions." The implication hit Ben like a physical blow. They'd been watching Rose longer than anyone had realized. He found Rose's apartment door slightly ajar, yellow crime scene tape already fluttering in the morning breeze. Detective Wallace emerged from inside, his face grim. "Torres, what brings you here?" His tone carried professional suspicion mixed with genuine concern. Ben gestured toward the damaged doorframe, the splinters of wood around the lock. "Heard there was trouble. Is Rose okay?" "That depends on your definition of okay." Wallace pulled off his latex gloves with sharp snaps. "Place was tossed professionally, nothing obviously missing, but someone was looking for something specific. Found signs of a struggle in the bedroom, but no blood, no body." He studied Ben's face carefully. "Any idea what someone might be looking for, or why Miss Mitchell might have disappeared?" The moment of truth arrived like a freight train Ben couldn't stop. Tell the truth and expose Rose's real identity, potentially saving her life, but destroying her carefully constructed cover. Stay silent and let law enforcement fumble in the dark while Caruso's people closed in for the kill. "Detective, there's something you need to know about Rose Mitchell." The words felt like betrayal, even as they offered the only hope of salvation. Wallace's eyebrows rose, but he pulled out his notepad with the practiced patience of a man who'd heard every possible confession. "I'm listening." Ben looked back toward his truck where Caleb waited, playing a handheld game and trusting his father to handle whatever adult problem had arisen. Some secrets were too dangerous to keep, even when revealing them meant admitting you'd been living a lie for months. "Her real name is Rachel Morgan. She's under federal witness protection, or was until yesterday. The men who attacked her at the diner, they work for Vincent Caruso, the man she testified against 2 years ago." Ben watched understanding dawn in Wallace's eyes like sunrise after a long, dark night. "Jesus Christ. And you know this how?" The question carried implications neither man wanted to explore fully. "Because I used to hunt men like Caruso for a living." The admission came out flat, matter-of-fact, stripped of pride or regret. "Navy SEALs. Special Operations. I've been out for 3 years, trying to be just a father and a plumber, but some skills don't fade, and some people don't forget." Wallace closed his notepad slowly, his expression shifting from suspicion to calculation. A decorated cop with military experience himself, he understood the weight of what Ben was revealing. "So when you took down those 2 thugs in 15 seconds, Wallace left the sentence hanging. Ben nodded. "Muscle memory. 20 years of training kicking in before I could think about it." He looked directly into the detective's eyes. "Wallace, if Caruso has Rose, she's got maybe 24 hours before he decides she's told him everything useful and eliminates her. Local law enforcement can't move fast enough. Federal agencies will get tangled in jurisdictional red tape.
Help me!
But I can find
Please,
her."
someone help!
The silence stretched between them like a bridge over dangerous water.
You're coming with us now.
Finally, Wallace spoke. "What do you need?" The question carried the weight of official sanction, off-the-books cooperation, and the understanding that some problems required solutions that existed outside normal legal boundaries. Time, mostly, and maybe a friend in local law enforcement who can look the other way while I do what needs to be done. Ben's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple but chilling. "Warehouse District, Pier 19. Come alone, or the teacher learns what happens to people who betray Vincent Caruso. You have 2 hours." Attached was a photo that made Ben's blood run cold. Rose bound to a chair in what looked like an abandoned building, a gag across her mouth and terror in her eyes. "They want me," Ben said quietly, showing Wallace the phone. "Classic bait and switch. Use Rose to draw me out, eliminate the threat I represent, then dispose of both witnesses." His tactical mind was already working through scenarios, calculating odds, assessing resources. None of the math looked good. 2 hours to cross town, conduct reconnaissance, formulate an assault plan, and execute against unknown numbers in unknown terrain with unknown weapons. Wallace studied the photo with professional detachment. Pier 19 burned down 2 years ago. Nothing left but the concrete foundation and some steel framework. Good place for an ambush, clear sight lines in all directions, limited approaches, easy disposal of evidence. He looked up at Ben with eyes that had seen too much violence in 20 years of police work. You go in there alone, you're dead. Simple as that. Maybe. Ben pocketed the phone and started walking toward his truck. But if I don't go, Rose is definitely dead. And eventually they'll come for Caleb anyway. Better to end it now on my terms than wait for them to choose the time and place. The logic was sound, even if the odds were suicidal. Some fights couldn't be avoided, only delayed until the enemy held all the advantages. Wallace caught his arm. Wait, what if there was another way? Ben stopped, hope flickering like a candle flame in wind. What if you didn't have to go in alone? The detective's radio crackled with routine traffic, but his attention was focused entirely on Ben's face. I've got a SWAT team that trains for exactly these scenarios. Hostage rescue, multiple hostiles, urban terrain. Give me 1 hour to make some calls. No time. Ben gently removed Wallace's hand from his arm. By the time you coordinate with federal agencies, get warrants, brief your team, and move into position, Rose will be dead, and Caruso's people will be gone. This has to be surgical, immediate, and completely off the books. The painful truth hung between them. Sometimes justice required actions that couldn't be sanctioned, planned, or explained in court. Ben drove home to find Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor, watching Caleb play in the backyard. She'd agreed to babysit on short notice, asking no questions when Ben explained he had an emergency plumbing call. Some lies were necessary, even to kind people who didn't deserve deception. Dad! Caleb ran over as Ben emerged from the house carrying a large duffel bag.
Help me! Please, someone help!
Are you going to work?
Don't move or I'll cut you!
Yeah, buddy. Big job across
You're coming
town.
with us now.
Mrs. Patterson's going to make you lunch and help with your homework. Ben knelt to his son's level, memorizing the curve of his cheek, the gap between his front teeth, the way his brown hair stuck up despite constant attempts to smooth it down. You be good for Mrs. Patterson, okay? And remember, Daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky. Something in his tone must have conveyed the gravity of the moment, because Caleb's expression grew serious. Dad, you're coming back, right? The innocent question hit harder than any enemy's bullet ever had. Ben pulled his son into a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of shampoo and childhood innocence. I'm going to try my hardest, buddy. But if something happens... He stopped, unable to voice the possibility that this might be goodbye. Nothing's going to happen, Caleb said, with the absolute certainty of a child who believed his father could fix anything, fight anyone, solve any problem. You're the strongest dad in the world. The faith in his son's eyes was simultaneously heartbreaking and empowering. Ben stood, shouldering the duffel bag that contained weapons and equipment he'd hoped never to use again. The drive to the warehouse district gave him time to center himself, to slip back into the mindset that had kept him alive through dozens of impossible missions. The man who worried about soccer practice schedules and parent-teacher conferences faded away, replaced by the operator who'd hunted terrorists through the mountains of Afghanistan and the streets of Iraq. It was a transformation he'd prayed he'd never need again. Pier 19 looked exactly as Wallace had described, a concrete skeleton surrounded by tall weeds and rusted metal, perfect for an ambush, but also offering opportunities for someone with the right training. Ben parked 4 blocks away and approached on foot, using abandoned buildings and shipping containers for cover. His phone showed 1 missed call from Morrison and 3 texts from unknown numbers, but he ignored them all. This had moved beyond words and negotiations. Through high-powered binoculars, he counted at least 6 men positioned around the warehouse ruins. Professional spacing, overlapping fields of fire, disciplined radio protocol. These weren't street thugs, but trained operatives. In the center of the concrete foundation, Rose sat bound to a metal chair, a single figure standing behind her with what looked like a pistol pressed to her head. Even at this distance, Ben could see she was conscious but injured. blood matting her dark hair. His tactical assessment was grim. 6-to-1 odds against trained opponents in prepared positions with a hostage, complicating any assault. No backup, no extraction plan, no margin for error. In his SEAL days, this would have been classified as a suicide mission, requiring at least a full team and extensive logistical support. But some missions couldn't wait for optimal conditions. Ben checked his weapons one final time. Suppressed pistol, combat knife, flashbang grenades, and enough ammunition for a very brief but intense firefight. Not enough to win a prolonged engagement, but possibly sufficient to create enough chaos to reach Rose and extract her from the kill zone. The plan was simple, because complex operations rarely survived contact with the enemy. Create multiple diversions, eliminate sentries silently, reach the hostage, and extract under cover of smoke and confusion. As the sun reached its zenith, casting harsh shadows among the warehouse ruins, Ben moved into position. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. Time had run out for complex solutions and careful planning. Now there was only motion and violence, training and instinct, the primal arithmetic of survival reduced to its most basic elements. Some problems could only be solved with the tools he'd spent 20 years mastering. The first sentry never knew what hit him. A shadow detached itself from the rusted shipping container, moved with liquid silence across 30 feet of broken concrete, and struck with surgical precision. The man dropped without a sound, his radio chattering with routine check-ins that would go unanswered. Ben dragged the body behind cover and appropriated the man's position, using the high-powered rifle to glass the remaining positions. 5 men remained, plus the one holding Rose. The odds were still impossibly long, but marginally better than moments before. Ben's earpiece crackled with intercepted radio traffic. They were using military-grade encrypted communications, but his equipment was designed to penetrate exactly such systems. Position sound off. 2 clear. 3 clear. 4 clear. 5 clear. When position 1 failed to respond, there would be perhaps 30 seconds before they realized they had a problem. The second sentry fell victim to a perfectly thrown combat knife, the blade taking him in the throat as he moved to investigate his missing partner. Ben recovered the knife and moved deeper into the maze of concrete and steel, using shadows and sight lines like a predator stalking prey. Each step brought him closer to Rose, but also deeper into the kill zone, where discovery meant certain death. Position 1, respond. The radio traffic was becoming more urgent. Position 2, what's your status? Ben smiled grimly as confusion spread through their ranks. Soon they would shift from defensive positions to active hunting, which would give him opportunities, but also compress his operational window. The element of surprise was his greatest advantage, but it wouldn't last long against disciplined opponents. The third man died to a silenced pistol shot as he rounded a corner, weapon raised and scanning for threats. Ben caught the body before it could fall and create noise, lowering it gently behind a concrete barrier. 3 down, 3 to go. The math was improving, but the most dangerous part lay ahead, crossing 40 feet of open ground to reach Rose, while her captor held a gun to her head. We have a problem. The voice on the radio was different now, older, more controlled, speaking with the authority of command. Scatter pattern Delta. Find our uninvited guest. Ben recognized the tactical terminology, the professional calm under pressure. These men had military training, possibly special operations experience. Vincent Caruso hadn't sent amateurs to handle this cleanup. Position 4 presented the most challenging elimination, elevated position with clear sight lines in multiple directions, impossible to approach unseen. Ben spent precious minutes working his way through the steel framework of a collapsed crane, using the twisted metal as both cover and ladder.
With us now.
The shot had to be perfect. One suppressed round through the base of the skull, instant death with no opportunity to raise an alarm. The The bullet found its mark with mechanical precision. 4 down. But as Ben moved toward position 5, his earpiece erupted with urgent chatter. "Sniper! We have a sniper in the crane. Position 4 is down." The element of surprise was gone, burned away like morning mist under harsh sunlight. Now it was a race against time and overwhelming firepower. Position 5 never had a chance to react to the warning. Ben's flashbang grenade detonated 3 feet from his position, the concentrated blast of light and sound turning a trained operative into a staggering, helpless target. A single pistol shot ended his confusion permanently. 1 hostile remaining, plus Rose's captor. The odds had shifted dramatically, but the most dangerous phase of the operation was just beginning. "Very impressive," called a cultured voice from the center of the concrete foundation. "Vincent Caruso himself, I presume." Ben responded, using broken concrete for cover as he closed the distance. "You cost me 5 good men today, Mr. Torres. That's going to be expensive to replace." The voice carried no anger, only the cold calculation of a businessman discussing overhead costs. Ben risked a quick look around his cover. Rose was still alive, still conscious, but Caruso held a nickel-plated pistol pressed firmly against her temple. The man was smaller than Ben had expected. Average height, expensively dressed, with silver hair and manicured nails that spoke of boardrooms rather than battlefields. But his eyes held the flat, emotionless gaze of a true predator. "Let her go!" Ben called out. "Your quarrel is with me now." It was a desperate gambit, but possibly his only chance to separate the hostage from her captor. Caruso laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "My quarrel is with anyone who costs me money, Mr. Torres. Miss Morgan here cost me $50 million and 2 years of legal fees. You cost me 5 trained operatives and considerable reputation damage. I'm afraid you both need to be written off as business expenses." "The FBI has everything," Rose said, her voice stronger than Ben had expected. "Killing us won't change that." She was stalling, trying to buy time, but also providing valuable intelligence. If the federal case was solid, Caruso's motivation was purely revenge rather than damage control. That made him more dangerous, but also more predictable. "Oh, my dear Rachel," Caruso said with mock affection, "you really think your federal friends can protect you? I've been planning this for 2 years. Every detail, every contingency, every possible outcome." His grip tightened on the pistol. "Did you really think you could destroy my life's work and just disappear into suburban anonymity? Did you think I would simply forget?" Ben used the conversation to move closer, slipping from cover to cover with practiced silence. 20 feet? 15, 10. At this range, accuracy wouldn't be an issue,
Help me!
but timing
Please,
would be
someone help!
everything.
Don't move, or
One
I'll
shot,
cut you.
perfectly placed,
You're coming
before
with us
Caruso
now.
could pull his own trigger. The margin for error was measured in milliseconds and millimeters. "The thing about revenge," Caruso continued, "is that it must be personal to be satisfying. I could have had you killed by long-range rifle, or car bomb, or any number of impersonal methods. But I wanted to look into your eyes when you realized that betraying Vincent Caruso was the last mistake you'd ever make." Ben's radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. "This is Detective Wallace, Cedar Falls PD. We have the warehouse surrounded. Release the hostage and surrender peacefully." The detective had ignored Ben's instructions about staying away, bringing backup despite the risks. It was either salvation or disaster, depending on Caruso's reaction to the new pressure. Caruso's head turned slightly toward the sound of approaching sirens, and Ben took his shot. The suppressed pistol coughed once, the subsonic round crossing 10 feet of space in a fraction of a heartbeat. But Caruso was already moving, trained reflexes saving his life even as Ben's bullet creased his scalp and sent him stumbling sideways. His own shot went wide, the bullet sparking off concrete inches from Rose's head. Ben vaulted his cover and sprinted toward Rose as Caruso rolled behind a steel beam, blood streaming down his face but very much alive. "Rose! Can you move?" She was already working at her bonds with remarkable efficiency, producing a small knife from somewhere in her clothing and sawing through the rope. Not a helpless victim after all, but someone with her own training and resources. "FBI taught me a few things during witness prep," she gasped, freeing her hands and immediately going to work on the ankle restraints. "Basic survival, rudimentary combat training, how to—" Her words were cut off by the sharp crack of Caruso's pistol, the bullet whining off the metal chair inches from her head. "Move!" Ben shouted, laying down covering fire as Rose rolled clear of her former prison. The warehouse ruins erupted in chaos as Wallace's SWAT team stormed the perimeter, their tactical lights cutting through shadows like laser beams. "Police! Drop your weapons!" The professional shouts overlapped with the crack of gunfire as Caruso's remaining men, apparently more than Ben had initially counted, engaged the incoming officers. Rose crawled behind cover beside Ben, her face pale but determined. "How many?" Ben asked, changing magazines with practiced speed. Rose peered around the concrete barrier, counting muzzle flashes. "At least 3 more, plus Caruso. They were holding back, waiting to see how you handled the perimeter guards." Her tactical assessment was accurate and professional, definitely more than a simple financial analyst who'd stumbled onto criminal activity. "Federal agent?" Rose said quietly, reading the question in Ben's eyes. "Deep cover assignment. I've been investigating Caruso Industries for 3 years, building the case from the inside." The revelation hit Ben like a physical blow. "You're not a kindergarten teacher." It wasn't really a question. "I am now. But I used to be DEA, Financial Crimes Division. The witness protection story was cover for my real identity." Ben's radio crackled with Wallace's voice. "Torres, if you can hear this, we have the building surrounded, but there's too much crossfire to extract you safely. Can you hold your position?" Ben keyed his radio while Rose provided covering fire with surprising competence. "Affirmative. 2 civilians secure, but we're pinned down by at least 4 hostiles, including the primary target." Caruso's voice echoed across the concrete foundation. "Agent Morgan, did you really think I wouldn't discover your real identity? 3 years of investigation, and you never realized I had sources inside your own agency." His laughter carried over the gunfire, like the sound of breaking bones. "Your handler, Agent Morrison, has been on my payroll for 6 months." Rose's face went white. "That's impossible. Morrison's been my lifeline, my only contact with the outside world." But even as she said it, pieces began falling into place. How Caruso's people had always seemed 1 step ahead. How they'd found her in Cedar Falls despite multiple identity changes. How they'd known about Ben's involvement almost immediately. The betrayal went deeper than anyone had realized. Ben's mind raced through implications and tactical adjustments. If Morrison was compromised, then everything he'd told Ben was suspect. The timeline, the threat assessment, the available resources, all potentially false or manipulated. "Rose, we need to assume everything Morrison told us was disinformation. What's the real situation with the federal case?" "Airtight," Rose replied, firing twice at a muzzle flash. "Caruso's going down whether he kills us or not. This is pure revenge, nothing more." She ejected her empty magazine and slammed in a fresh one with movements that spoke of extensive training. "But if he escapes tonight, he'll disappear forever. Swiss bank accounts, private jets, countries with no extradition treaties. This is our only chance to end it." The SWAT team was making progress, their coordinated advance forcing Caruso's men into an increasingly tight defensive perimeter. But the crime lord himself remained elusive, using the maze of concrete and steel to avoid direct confrontation. Ben caught glimpses of expensive suit fabric and silver hair, but never a clear shot. The man was proving as skilled at survival as he was at criminal enterprise. "Dad!" The voice cut through gunfire and tactical radio chatter like a sword through silk. Ben's blood turned to ice as he recognized Caleb's terrified cry. Somehow, impossibly, his son was here in the middle of a firefight. Ben spun toward the sound, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. "Caleb, stay down! Stay hidden!" Caruso's laughter rose above the chaos. "How touching! A family reunion." Ben could see him now, partially concealed behind a concrete pillar, with one arm wrapped around a small, struggling figure. Caleb's face was streaked with tears, but his eyes were defiant rather than defeated. "Let me go! My dad's going to stop you!" The 7-year-old's faith was heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. "Your dad is going to watch you die," Caruso called out. "Just like you're going to watch him die. Payment in full for the inconvenience you've both caused me." The pistol moved from Rose to Caleb, and Ben felt something inside
Help
his
me!
chest
Please,
tear
someone
loose.
help!
All tactical considerations vanished,
You're coming with us
replaced
now.
by the primal fury of a father protecting his child. Ben moved without conscious thought, sprinting across open ground in a straight line toward his son. Bullets whined around him, sparked off concrete, tugged at his clothing, but nothing could stop the momentum of paternal desperation. He covered 30 feet in heartbeats that felt like hours. His world narrowed to the sight of his child in danger, and the man who threatened him. The tackle drove both Ben and Caruso to the ground in a tangle of limbs and fury. Caruso's pistol went flying, clattering across concrete, as the two men rolled and fought with savage intensity. Ben had training and experience, but Caruso fought with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. They traded blows that would have felled lesser men, each seeking the leverage or position that would end the fight permanently. "Dad!" Caleb scrambled clear of the struggling men, his small legs carrying him toward the approaching SWAT officers. "Over here! Help my dad!" His voice cut through the chaos, providing a beacon of hope in the middle of violence. Ben used the momentary distraction to gain advantage, his forearm finding Caruso's throat and applying pressure with surgical precision. "It's over," Ben gasped, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. Caruso's struggles grew weaker as oxygen deprivation took its toll. Around them, the gunfire was dying as Wallace's team systematically eliminated the remaining hostiles. "Your empire's finished. Your people are dead or captured. There's nowhere left to run." Caruso's eyes rolled back, consciousness fading under Ben's chokehold. But with his last coherent moment, he managed to whisper something that chilled Ben's blood. "You think this ends with me? I'm just one head of the Hydra. Cut me off, and 2 more take my place." The threat hung in the air like poisonous smoke even as Caruso went limp. Wallace appeared beside them, tactical flashlight illuminating the scene. "Suspect secure. We need paramedics over here. Multiple injuries, unknown status." He looked at Ben with something approaching awe. "Jesus, Torres, when I said you didn't have to go in alone, I didn't mean bring your kid as backup." Despite everything, Ben found himself laughing, the kind of laughter that came after mortal terror had been survived. "Dad!" Caleb launched himself into Ben's arms with the devastating impact of pure love. "I was so scared. Mrs. Patterson said men came to the house asking about you, so I hid in your truck when you left. I wanted to help." The explanation tumbled out between tears and hiccups. Ben held his son so tightly that breathing became secondary to the need to never let him go again. Rose approached slowly, her own injuries evident, but not life-threatening. "Is he?" She gestured toward Caruso's unconscious form. Ben checked for a pulse, found one strong and steady. "Alive. He'll stand trial after all." The justice system would have its chance to process Vincent Caruso through proper channels, assuming he didn't have more surprises waiting in the shadows. The aftermath moved with the organized chaos of major crime scene processing. Paramedics
Help
checked
me!
everyone for
Please, someone
injuries,
help!
while crime
Don't
scene
move or I'll
technicians
cut you.
photographed evidence, and
You're
Detective
coming with us
Wallace
now.
coordinated with federal agents who'd arrived via helicopter. Ben found himself answering questions from a dozen different agencies,
each with their own jurisdiction and procedures. Agent Morrison appeared as the sun began to set, his face carefully neutral as he approached Ben and Rose. "Hell of a thing," he said quietly. "Never seen anything quite like it." But his eyes held something Ben recognized from too many classified briefings, the look of a man with secrets that would never see daylight. The betrayal Caruso had claimed might have been a final lie, but doubt had been planted. "Morrison," Rose said carefully. "How did Caruso's people know about Ben so quickly? How did they know about his background, his capabilities?" The questions hung in the air like accusations waiting for answers that might never come. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or calculation. "Good questions," Morrison replied. "We'll be investigating that thoroughly. Security breaches of this magnitude don't happen without inside knowledge." The non-answer was perfectly crafted to deflect suspicion while admitting nothing. Ben made a mental note to trust nothing Morrison said without independent verification. Some betrayals were too sophisticated to detect until after the damage was done. Done. As the last of the crime scene vehicles departed, Ben sat on the tailgate of his truck with Caleb curled against his side, exhausted by the day's trauma, but safe. Rose joined them, her own injuries bandaged, but her eyes alert and thoughtful. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. "To us, I mean. To this." She gestured vaguely at the space between them where shared danger had forged unexpected connections. "I don't know," Ben admitted. 3 days ago I was just a plumber with a son and a quiet life. Now..." He looked around at the warehouse ruins, the bloodstains on concrete, the evidence markers that told the story of violence narrowly survived. "Now I'm not sure who I am anymore." The transformation back to civilian life seemed impossible after everything that had happened. Caleb stirred against his father's side. "Dad, are you going to be a soldier again?" The innocent question cut straight to the heart of Ben's internal struggle. Could he return to the simple life of parent-teacher conferences and soccer practice after rediscovering his capacity for violence? Could he pretend the last few hours hadn't awakened something he'd thought buried forever? "No, buddy," Ben said firmly. "I'm going to be exactly what I've always been. Your dad. That's the most important job in the world." But even as he said it, Ben wondered if peace was possible for men like him. Some doors, once opened, could never be fully closed again. Some knowledge, once gained, changed everything that came after. Rose stood slowly, wincing from her injuries. "I should go. There will be debriefings, paperwork, probably relocation again." She looked down at Caleb with something like regret. "I'm sorry you got pulled into this. Both of you deserved better than having my problems explode into your lives." The apology carried weight, but also acceptance that some damage couldn't be undone. "Rose!" Ben called as she walked toward her car. She turned back, silhouetted against the floodlights that still illuminated the crime scene. "This doesn't have to be goodbye. Cedar Falls could use a good kindergarten teacher, assuming the cover identity holds up." The invitation was tentative, fragile, but genuine. After everything they'd survived together, some connections deserved a chance to grow. She smiled for the first time since the ordeal began. Rachel Morgan might be interested in staying. She's grown fond of small-town life and the people who live here. The subtle distinction between her real name and her cover identity suggested possibilities neither of them was ready to explore fully. But time had a way of healing wounds and building bridges across the spaces left by violence. 6 months later, Ben stood in his backyard watching Caleb practice baseball swings, while Rachel, she'd legally changed her name to match her cover identity, tended a small garden she'd planted along the fence line. Vincent Caruso was serving life without parole in a federal supermax facility. Agent Morrison had quietly retired amid an internal investigation that would probably never see public light. The nightmares had faded, replaced by dreams of ordinary things: grocery shopping, homework help, Saturday morning cartoons. The weapons and equipment from that terrible day remained locked in their case, gathering dust in a closet that rarely opened anymore. Peace, it turned out, was possible even for men who'd seen too much violence. It just required constant choice, daily recommitment to the idea that love was stronger than training. "Dad!" Caleb called out. "Look at this!" He'd managed to hit 3 practice balls in a row, each one sailing cleanly over the neighbor's fence. Ben applauded enthusiastically, while Rachel looked up from her flowers with soil-stained hands and a smile that made ordinary moments feel like miracles. Some stories ended not with grand gestures, but with the quiet victory of another peaceful day. The phone in Ben's pocket remained silent. No mysterious numbers, no coded messages, no voices from a past that seemed increasingly distant. Whatever threats Vincent Caruso had hinted at remained dormant, perhaps deterred by the spectacular failure of his revenge attempt. Or perhaps gathering strength for another approach at another time. But that was tomorrow's problem, and Ben had learned to live fully in each present moment. As evening settled over Cedar Falls like a comfortable blanket, Ben helped Caleb with homework, while Rachel prepared dinner in the kitchen. They'd gradually learned to share. The sounds were domestic, peaceful, beautifully ordinary. Pencil scratching on paper, vegetables sizzling in oil, the distant hum of traffic carrying people home to their own quiet lives. Sometimes the greatest victories were measured not in enemies defeated, but in moments preserved, in the simple miracle of another day, when love proved stronger than everything that tried to destroy it.